welcome to the second retargeting webinar we've done. This is the Retargeting Masterclass. We did a retargeting webinar a couple of weeks ago, which was more of a 101, where we went over some of the basics of retargeting. Definitely a good read. So if any of this is over your head or you want to refresh yourself with that, please do head to our content hub where you can listen and read all about it. But this masterclass is going into a bit more of the, not the academic side, but more of the sophisticated underbelly of a retargeting product. So what are maybe some of the things to be aware of under the hood, and the conversion strategy and incrementality and that kind of stuff. So I'm Alasdair Snow. I've done a couple of these in the past, so you might have seen me before. Well, I'm one of the co-founders and the chief product officer here at Triptease, and I'm hosting today's webinar. I'm joined by Scott, who's also hopefully a familiar face. Maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Scott. I'm the product manager for retargeting here at Triptease, and so I was doing the last webinar with Lily.
Yeah, great. And then also today we have the luxury of being joined by David Philippson. So I'll let David introduce himself, but just by way of introduction from our side, when we launched retargeting, we wanted to get as many experts in the building as possible to really help us build the best possible product we could, and really bring something really compelling and differentiated to market. So David's been an amazing partner helping us. But yeah, I'll let David introduce himself.
Thank you, Alasdair, for your kind words. So my name is David Philippson. I am the CEO and co-founder of a business called DataSeat. That is my new startup. What is probably more relevant is my businesses of the past. Previously, I founded a business called AdX Tracking, which was an in-app attribution business. So we actually developed attribution software to allow marketeers to attribute value to their marketing partners. That was acquired by Criteo in 2013, and then for my sins, I worked at Criteo for 4 years, and the majority of my time there was building Criteo's in-app retargeting products, where some of the OTAs, so the Expedia Booking.coms, were some of our biggest clients. So the combination of understanding attribution and then building a retargeting business. When I left Criteo, I met the Triptease team, and I was super excited about the data and capability they had to build a retargeting product. And I've acted as an advisor for the last 6 months.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, thank you, David. So today's going to be a bit of a mixture between as I say, going through some subject areas in retargeting, but also kind of an ask us anything or ask me anything. So please do send in any questions you have as we go through, and we'll probably pick those up on the way. And so we'll have one eye open on the question panel. So please do send any questions as we go through it. In terms of the agenda, we're going to first talk about brand safety, which is an important subject. We're then going to talk about the impending cookie apocalypse, as some people predict, particularly data protection legislation such as GDPR, and also ad blockers and what kind of influence that might have on retargeting products in the future. We're also going to talk about attribution, incrementality, and other very important subjects as it relates to any kind of advertising-based product, or any product in general, but particularly in this space. We're also then going to talk about dynamic and segmented content, so really getting into the content and creative optimization piece and things to be aware of and look out for on that front, as well as do a quick intro to Triptease's own retargeting product and how we're architecting that and building something quite unique and differentiated. I'll put Q&A at the end here. We'll make time at the end for further questions, but as I said, please do ask questions as we go, if on anything we kind of cover off. Just to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about before we dive in, we are specifically talking about display retargeting today. So it is possible to retarget people inside Google search, inside meta search in Google, but we're specifically talking about display retargeting, which is where, as this diagram's supposed to show, customers might visit your website, but they need some more time to consider that purchase. So they'll leave and they'll go elsewhere, get on with their lives, looking around the web, and that creates an opportunity for us to display advertising to entice them back to the hotel website and consider a purchase on the direct channel, and hopefully ultimately end up in a booking. So it's about keeping the hotel top of mind using display advertising. So how does that work technically? So there's a number of steps that happen. We have access to what is known as ad exchanges, which basically auction houses where they're connecting buyers with sellers. Effectively, they're the sellers of auction space or advertising space on publisher sites, and the buyers of that, which are the advertisers like yourselves. So what happens when a user lands on a hotel website? This auction kind of starts for that specific ad slot. We have algorithms which are looking at who the best people to target in those auctions are. We determine how much we're willing to bid, and then ultimately, if we win the bid, we get the opportunity to show and serve an advert to that customer. That's kind of retargeting bidding process. Helpful to have that in mind as we go through this. In terms of the market opportunity, it's huge. So this is from Fuel Travel's 2019 leisure report. They found that 87% of people visiting a hotel website, guests visit a hotel website at some point in their path to purchase. I imagine for many people on the call today, they're not getting 80% of their guests booking direct, but it's very likely a large number of people who are booking on other channels have visited that hotel website at some point. So that's the gap and the gap we want to close and the opportunity we think that's there. So it's a big audience to go after, and then ultimately it definitely nets out at being much cheaper to go after customers who've already visited your website, where there's been some expressed interest and desire, then go out and try and get a completely cold lead. So we sometimes talk about retargeting being as you've got a customer very close to that finish line, you just spend a little bit more to kind of tip them over the edge, and that's the kind of the big idea here. So jumping straight into brand safety. So brand safety is kind of covers a few things here. We're talking about reputational damage that might occur, but we're also talking about potentially financial damage that may occur from fraud. We'll start with talking about brand safety. I think is probably the best thing to do. I'm going to call on yourself, David, at this point, if that's all right. Which is, so what do we mean by brand safety? What's at stake here? Why should hoteliers be concerned about this?
Sure. Thanks, Alasdair. I think before I go into the detail, it's worth exploring why it's become so much more important. And I think, I mean, first of all, if you ask any brand manager or marketeer at a hotel whether their brand is important to them, of course it is. But why has it become more important is really because of the rise of programmatic. Whilst if we go back, 5-10 years in digital media, where a marketeer would be buying directly from a certain other publisher website, it was easy for them to select and control what is a brand safe website for them to be running on, right? Now, what programmatic has done is given marketeers and technology providers such as us the ability to give huge scale to any marketeer. And that scale is actually because we can serve adverts now on hundreds of thousands of websites, in fact, millions of pages. So with that, with great opportunity, also comes some potential threats. Now, if we look at, a website that is selling, arms, or it's got hate speech or crime or drugs or adult content or even gambling for some, that's easy to understand. And actually the technology that is in place to stop your brand appearing on an adult site, that's easy to deploy. Now, where it becomes a lot more complex is if you then look at the grey areas. If I call those, they're the black areas, and I call them black areas because they're controlled with blacklists. We have a blacklist of adult sites and gambling sites. Your ads will not appear there. What's interesting is if you look at the grey areas, and I'll give you an example. These, the Guardian could be considered an absolute, clean, brand safe environment for you to run. But then if you consider some of the links within the Guardian, just think about the horrific incidents on London Bridge just last week. If there's an article on the Guardian about a terrorist attack, we wouldn't want to serve your advert there. It's nothing against the Guardian, but again, it's something you wouldn't want to have your brand associated to. So with this complexity, we actually use third-party expertise. Now, anything that we have expertise in, we'll build ourselves, but stuff that is beyond our expertise, where you can actually license, we will do, and we work with some of the market leading partners in the industry, typically Oracle. Oracle owned two businesses through acquisitions. They acquired a business called Grapeshot. And Grapeshot's value proposition is actually they contextually analyze, index the whole of the internet. So in that instance, by us partnering with Grapeshot, we would ensure that your ad wouldn't even appear on The Guardian where there was a link and a content associated with some potentially damaging content. So it is important. We use specialist technology providers to ensure that our clients are protected.
Okay, and what kind of impact might this have on like performance? Are you talking about limiting your campaign to, like, is it are we talking about closing the advertising off from a large swathe of the internet, or is this quite small?
It's a good question, because it's an incredibly small, or rather, I'll answer it the other way. Is there a huge amount of brand safe, inventory out there? Yes, there is.
Right.
But damage, 99% of the damage can come from that, tiny percent of inventory that can cause the damage. So, so this doesn't limit our scale, but we need those checks and controls in place to ensure that 1% doesn't do the 99% of the damage.
Right. Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And just to confirm, this is something that we are, Scott. I know you've been working with a team to deploy inside our own product.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we think about brand safety in three ways, and so we have three kind of levels of protection. So the first of which is the DSP that we're using to connect to all those different ad exchanges. They will have an exclusion list of sites that they know to be, subject to a lot of like bad content or malicious content, as well as bot fraud. So there's a level of filtering there. We then have, the third-party kind of experts in this, so Grapeshot, owned by Oracle, where they're doing kind of semantic or contextual analysis of what's actually on the page and where is that appearing, to make sure the ads don't then appear on there. We then have like a third level of control, and this is a slightly more like passive way of controlling this, which is the way that our bid model works, which is making constant adjustments, looking at what's the rate of interaction between users and the adverts. So if there is a site that is perhaps like not going to be performant, then it will actually start to kind of down rank that website. And so if it has slipped through the net, so it's happening very rarely. There's three levels of like before that, but those are the things we use in combination to keep brand safe.
Okay. So it's and David, if you're managing your spend through like yourself through something like either directly through like Google Ad Exchange or elsewhere, this is not going to be part of that, right? It needs to be a considered approach. You need to technically integrate and actually your models or
my advice to any advertiser, I think if they're working with credible firms such as Triptease or or Google, I think it's right that they ask that provider what brand safety mechanisms they have in place. But they should ask, and in most cases when they're working with a credible large organisation, they're going to have those checks and controls in place. The word of caution I would give is if any of our hotelier clients have just in their past they just say, oh, well, we just work with our agency to do retargeting, and by no means am I throwing stones at that opportunity at all, but you need to make sure those checks and controls are in place. That's just a word of caution. But by no means is every retargeting offering has in place brand safety solutions. They don't. I know they don't. So it's worth checking. Any brand manager or marketer should check.
Okay, cool. Thank you, David. And then lastly on the issue of brand safety is something we do get asked occasionally about, which is this idea of bot fraud. So people fraudulently clicking ads and therefore claiming bookings and all kinds of stuff like that. Like could you talk us through and explain that, David, and how what protections you can place?
Sure, I shall. I could talk for hours and days about about this type of fraud or internet fraud or inventory ad tech fraud, and in fact we've developed our own software to detect some of this stuff, but that's in-app. That's not selling anything here. So first of all, is fraud on the internet, advertising fraud, is it big? It's huge. I mean, it's enormous. Just have a look for MethBot. It was a internet fraud scheme that was rumbled at the beginning of 2018. It was netting $5 million a day. They were faking domains, they were faking impressions. I mean, this was organized crime unit out of Russia, and it was, and there's actually criminal charges taken. So is it big? It's huge. And unfortunately, many brands are ripped off by paying for adverts that it wasn't a human, essentially. But first of all, I think, right, so accepting it's a big problem, I think it is very specific to certain campaigns. Now, where I feel completely comfortable saying for retargeting, it is significantly less of a problem, because we've just got to examine the dynamic of what it is that we're doing. First of all, and you've got to also examine if there was fraud, how is the bad actor doing it? And I'll give an example. So let's say human traffic, or let's just say traffic, reaches a hotelier's website. And this could be many of the people that have joined this call today. They may be a medium-sized hotel, or they may have 5 bed and breakfasts. And so first of all, those types of hotels are not targeted by the fraudsters. But anyway, users land on the hotel, they look at certain booking pages, and they may not have purchased. We've seen that data. We then target them elsewhere. So the very fact we are targeting devices that we have already identified to have very human-like behavior means that they're, of the inventory we're buying out there in the big bad internet where there is lots of fraud, we are already targeting users that have already been qualified as human. Now, where bot traffic is incredibly dangerous is prospecting. Is where ad tech companies are spraying and praying, I call it. It's prospecting, top of the funnel. That is where most of the invalid traffic or non-human traffic or bot fraud takes place. So having said that, we still have the checks and controls in place with the tech providers that we partner with. Again, we've partnered with Oracle Solutions, Moat. The generic term is ad verification, but within their ad verification, they have brand safety as well as invalid traffic detection, which includes non-human traffic. That's a very summarized version. I did say I could talk about this for hours, but that's my summarized version.
Okay, so in short, the retargeting product is a successful retargeting product is predicated on identifying potentially high-value customers who are on the website, and that activity in and of itself helps screen out bots, likely, because you're looking for people who are behaving like interested customers, and those are the ones we're more likely to spend more money on, try and get them back to the hotel website. And so that we're slightly insulated and protected against some of this. There's less exposure on a retargeting solution. Okay, great.
Significantly less exposure. Yes, agreed.
Great. Okay, I'm now. There's been one question, which was, will there be a replay of this? I believe we'll be making this available in the Content Hub. So yes, that I can confirm now. That will be made available. We're now going to move on to the question of cookies. So as I joked at the beginning, there's this impending cookie apocalypse. Some people reference this. A day will come when cookies are banned and can no longer exist, and all advertising and targeted advertising will come to an end. This is an interesting subject. So we could probably spend a lot of time here. We're going to talk about 2 impacts of this. One is the rise of things like AdBlock or AdBlock Plus or AdBlocker, and the other one is data protection legislation. But starting with AdBlock, David, do you think this is a major issue, or do you think this is overstated and a bit overblown?
So first of all, ad blockers have been around for ages, for 10 years, but they started making a lot of noise and gaining traction around 2015, 2016. There's one in particular that had over 50 million installs, and it's called AdBlock Plus. But even the most popular with 50 million installs, that's 50 million installs on browsers, and we've all got 3 or 4 devices, and so you've got to put this into context of quantity and the percentage of scale that's out there. So first of all, of our addressable market of everyone that visits your websites, what percentage of those users using ad blocker? Very few. That's the first point. Second point, if someone is using an ad blocker, we will make no attempts to try and circumvent that or try and hack it or reverse engineer it. If someone doesn't want to see an ad, we're not going to try and work around it. You know, we kind of respect consumer choices. My third point, and now I am an advertising professional, but I'm applying this to the rest of the population. I do believe that the majority of people that want a free and open internet appreciate that most content that they're viewing for free needs to monetize and fund themselves through advertising. And actually, even our friends at Adblocker Plus realized this, and in the capitalist world that we live in, they had to figure out a way to make money. You know, if any of them have joined our call today, I'm sure they try and correct me, but Adblock Plus, the most successful ad blocker, actually had done deals with all of the credible ad companies, including Criteo when I was there. So at Criteo, we did a deal with Adblocker to allow our ads to circumvent or get past their ad blocker, because the main proposition of any ad blocker should be to block irritable, illegal adverts, those ones that pop up in your browser, follow you around, you try and click close, it won't close, or it automatically pushes you through. It's those types of adverts that damage the internet, that damage user experience, and let's be real, those are the ads that people want to stop. So again, I could talk a lot about it, but it's not a problem. We don't try and circumvent it. And the majority of ad blockers will allow credible ads that are serving, that are attempting to serve, a valuable advert to the right person at the right time that has some value. That should be there, and it helps monetize content provider. So,
sure.
I think it's the best for everyone. So
Adblock overstated, but definitely a lot of noise around data protection legislation, GDPR in particular, California Data Act. Like, what's your view on the future of the cookie? Should people be concerned? Like, what's the kind of the long-term future?
I'll separate the two topics of GDPR and future of the cookie. GDPR, I see that's more in law, government, type hands, and future of the cookie, well, that's as much in Google and Apple's hands as it is, more so. So first of all, GDPR. It's a good thing. Anything that is regulating and policing and protecting consumers' data from bad actors, it's got to be a good thing. And that's because that's who it's targeting. It's targeting people that would do bad things with data. And so it's set a high bar for anyone that is processing data or controlling data as to what standard they need to adhere to provide those solutions and to receive the data that they do. Specifically within the programmatic environment, so GDPR, there's a huge long list of everything that controllers and processors need to do to be compliant. But my expertise around programmatic, I will just briefly comment on. As far as of how Triptease is bidding, we can only and will only bid to an impression where that user has given consent both to the publisher and to the advertiser. So to the advertisers, when they land on the hotelier's website, and all of our hoteliers need to have terms and conditions that say we use cookies, you need to accept this is what we use cookies for. That is explicit consent. So that's one tick. The other tick is that when we're connected to these ad exchanges, we will only buy inventory where that publisher has got consent from that same user, to actually run and monetize through advertising. So that's why I feel completely summarized. GDPR is a good thing. It affects bad actors, not good actors, and we are absolutely compliant.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry.
So no, I'm just. I'm sorry. I should pause for your comment, but then I can talk about cookies if you wish.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just to reiterate that, right? I think this is an important subject. We in that GDPR legislation, Triptease is the Data processor is the legal term, and the hotelier is the data controller. So ultimately owns and controls the data they collect on the customers. We take very reasonable steps to help ensure our hoteliers are compliant, and as David's saying there, right, that's everything from providing guidance around what amendments they need to make to cookie policies, privacy policies, consent notifications, and all that kind of stuff. So we think it's important, and we do as much as we can to help. Yes, sorry, please do. Yeah, on cookies specifically.
Cookies, yeah, the old cookie monster. I've heard about the cookie monster for the last 10 years, I think, that cookies are disappearing. I think it's become more to a head because of ITP from Apple, which is Intelligent Tracking Prevention, where Apple's latest operating systems and Safari browsers start deleting cookies after a certain amount of time. One thing to remind ourselves, Apple makes zero revenues out of advertising. I can assure you, if they made revenues out of advertising, they probably may take a different approach, and they try and wear the holier than thou hats that all we care about is consumer privacy, which is ironic considering some of their FaceTime apps that we're listening to all your conversations. Sorry, anyway, I think what is important though is when you analyze. So has ITP affected the amount of cookies that we can see within the Safari browser? Yes, it has, and it's actually a time interval. Interestingly, you still have cookies visible for a certain amount of time, and we see in our own Triptease data that the most amount of people that have been on your website tend to book within the next 72 hours. So actually, that 72-hour period, which is good for hotels and travel, is actually still good within Safari. So that's the first thing to note. Second thing to note, Safari as a global browser install base is in the low double digits. So I think it's around 15% or maybe less. Chrome and Firefox by far the most. It's also interesting. Google does make significant advertising revenues, so that's also worth noting. Although Google will probably make similar moves, but we do not see cookies disappearing. We can understand why there'd be more technology to stop bad actors abusing cookies. So as long as we're delivering value to our clients and we're serving relevant, timely adverts to consumers, we think that this type of technology and solution is going to be around for the long term.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that there's a huge portion of the internet that is built economically on the cookie, and so it's not like it's just going to switch off overnight. And there are tons of people thinking about this, and in the instance where the cookie does change shape or form or does go away, there are lots of other things that advertisers will be able to use at their disposal as a way to identify users, whether that's looking at things like their device ID, or whether they can do things around using emails or first-party data that you're able to collect from that. So there's lots of different ways that it could evolve, and it's just people are slowly figuring it out.
Yeah. To use an analogy, we're all going down a motorway at 70 miles an hour. We're more likely to be changing lanes than implementing something that's going to cause all of us to crash and have a horrific pileup. So that's how we expect it to unfold. But I think we can move on to the thank you for that. We're going to move on to the thorny but fascinating subject of attribution and incrementality. So I'm going to hand over to Scott here, talk through what I think here is what different types of attribution are there. Take us through it.
Sure. So just for the avoidance of doubt, what we mean by attribution is when we can say that the revenue that you receive, so from a booking, we can attribute that, i.e. tie it back to a particular advert or a set of adverts. So I think I spoke about this in the last webinar, but if we think about the history of the advertising industry, attribution has always been done on a view-through basis. So that's TV advertising, magazine. It's been there's been an assumption that if I expose or have an impression to X many users, then you then have to make a probabilistic guess at how many of those sales that you then saw after that point would driven by that advert or attributed. So when we move into the digital world, we have the ability to do that same type of attribution, and that's what we call view-through attribution. But then there's also click-through attribution. So this is where, rather than just making an assumption that the user has seen the advert, we can actually say that they've clicked, they've interacted with that advert, and then gone on to make a purchase. And so I'll kind of try and break that down a little bit more now with a few different examples of different methods of attribution, and then also looking at attribution windows. So if we just imagine that there's this example here. So if on this axis here, I hope everyone can see the mouse, but at this point here on the left-hand side, this is the point in time at which this is kind of day 0 or minute 0 where a user has left your site. Then this point on the right is that point of purchase. So we know that actually travel is one of the most kind of complex kind of decision journeys, because it's it's very expensive. It's not like buying a pair of shoes. There's a lot of consideration that goes in. You're typically speaking to other members of your friends or family about what it is, where you might be staying. You're looking for reviews, so you may be going to lots of different sites, and in going to all these different sites and checking things out as you narrow down your choice and just before you get to the point of purchase, that creates lots of opportunity for the hotel to actually make sure that you're reminding them once they've left your site, hey, remember to come back and book direct, and actually, or don't book at one of my competitors, or don't book via an OTA. And that's really, it's the OTAs who do this so well, and the OTAs who we're trying to give hotels the opportunity to fight against. So if you imagine here, it may be, and this is just a very rough example, but here we might say this user has seen an advert 6 times and clicks on 2 different adverts before making their purchase. So the question is, okay, well, which one of those adverts should should attribute that revenue? And it's really hard to say, right? And I think it's really worth pointing out, there's no right or wrong answer. It's the same thing. There's this analogy that I heard the other day that's it's like in a game of football or soccer, if you're in the US, if the ball gets passed around to 3 different people and then someone scores, who scored the goal? Is it the person who scored? Is it the person that set the striker up? And it's hard. So I'll just kind of run through the 3 most common methodologies. So the first of those, and probably the most common, is last click attribution. So what we're doing here, we're looking at all of those different ways that the users interacted with or engaged with different ads, but we say we're going to have 100% of the booking value. We're going to say that was driven by that last click, and that's probably the most commonly used.
The striker gets all the credit.
Exactly, that's right. And that's kind of to use that football analogy, that's kind of how it's done there. The other way to think about it is if it's first click attribution, and so here we actually say, what, it was that first click, that first interaction where they've really shown a very strong positive signal and then jump back onto the website. That should be the ad that wins or gets the booking. Then there's what's known as multi-touch attribution. So this is when you can actually divide the value across different impressions or clicks, and you might want to weight those based on time, whether it was a click or an impression. And then you can get incredibly sophisticated models that try to work out which of these. But the overwhelming thing that and this is something I guess when we started researching the space that I just found super interesting, is there is no right or wrong answer. It really is a matter of opinion, and I guess as advertisers you need to think about what's right for you. So the next thing is thinking about look back windows. So what we mean by look back window is, so at that point of conversion, how far back are we going to look in terms of, so for example, if at this point here where someone has made a conversion, let's say if we had a 1-day look back window, what we might see actually is that none of these impressions or clicks, if they were in there as well, have actually driven a booking. And there's a question like, is that right or wrong? It's probably wrong, right? I'm sure, we know that impressions and clicks will have an influence. So actually, we might say here, having a 1-day window might actually be too punitive, and you might say you're actually doing yourself a disservice. And if you're paying for ad spend, you're kind of then almost, shooting yourself in the foot. So you say, well, actually, based on my rules, I'm going to say that none of that added any value, but it very likely has. On the other end of the spectrum, you might say, okay, well, if in a 30-day view-through window, so that user saw that advert, 1 month ago, but then they haven't seen another advert since, and then you go, yeah, we're still going to claim that. I think, if your view-through attribution window will say 40 days or 60 days or 90 days, that at the other, we might say, okay, maybe that's a bit long. So we think that there's kind of a middle ground, and that's, we might say that could be a 7-day window. And again, it's very different based on, views and clicks, and we're kind of figuring out what's the right level. So it's something that we kind of encourage our our hotels and our advertisers to think about. And we want to be super transparent, with all the bookings that that we're generating, and we're looking intently, with our data science team at how many views that they have. Did they click on 5 adverts and then make the booking? Was it 3? Was it 7? And what's the right number of impressions that we should show to each user each day in order to try and persuade them to come back? So yeah, that's kind of going through that really, really quickly. I think so. To summarize that, there's kind of really no right or wrong answer. There's different ways you can think about it. Last click attribution is the most common, and that's the method that we employ here at Triptease. In terms of the look back window, we think that probably moving out beyond, thinking about 60, 90 days, that's too long. 1 day is quite short. There's somewhere in the middle that kind of works. But again, that depends slightly on the hotel, the booking, the length of the booking cycle, and whether you're thinking about or a view through or a click through basis.
Yeah, cool. David, how did you find, how has attribution windows, you've obviously been in this industry quite a fair amount of time. How have you found attribution windows have evolved over your time, particularly elsewhere?
There's a few things that Scott said I think are super relevant, and I'll just focus in on one, and that's transparency. And I'm focusing on that because I think it's something that the industry lacks. And it's something that we're addressing here just by talking about this topic. Now, I think any marketeer that's spending money driving the hotel bookings is probably spending with multiple media partners. And it's then also worth reminding ourselves of what is attribution systems, technologies, methodology. What's it there for? Is to give a marketeer a consistent way to measure return on ad spend and incrementality for all of their different media partners, so that they can allocate budget to the ones that's making the most money. So if that's the goal, then actually ensuring a marketeer understands the attribution methods used by media partner 1, 2, and 3 is absolutely critical. And from the research we've done at Triptease, what we've discovered is when we speak to our clients and they're working with A, B, C companies, they're not really sure what their attribution windows are. And so that's what we're addressing and trying to change here. We're being on the front foot, saying these are the different choices out there. Unfortunately, they're not always choices for the advertiser. Often it's the media company that will say this is what it is. But again, that's fine. But as a marketer, you have to understand it, because if they're different, you then realize I'm not comparing apples to apples.
Right.
So partner 1 that's on 30-day view through compared to us that may be on a 7-day view through, partner 1's got a massive bias. They've got a huge advantage. So we just want to encourage transparency, and you encourage transparency by educating, sharing knowledge, and then what happens is that marketeers then start pushing their different media partners for a consistent approach, and then they make better decisions as to where to allocate budget.
So you could be in a situation where you're looking at the performance being reported by 2 different vendors, and you're like, well, these guys are amazing, they're driving so many bookings, but actually, if you dig into the attribution logic they're using, let's say like 30-day view-through attribution, you might go, well, actually, the one that's claiming a far lower ROI is actually the one that's probably more likely telling you the truth, and is actually the one you should probably be going with longer term, not the one that's making.
Alasdair, I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, and I've seen it for tier 1 advertisers in the US that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising. I've seen it. They think that media partner 1 is an absolute rock star.
Yeah.
And I've looked at the data and said, but they're on a 30-day view through, and the one that you think is crap is on a 7-day click through. It is the complete opposite to comparing apples to apples. And that is the challenge that I get every marketeer that is spending on multiple channels. They're trying to allocate spend on based on incrementality and return on ad spend. What are the different attribution methods?
I think one other thing as well is if we just go back to this kind of first layer. If you imagine actually in here that these aren't all retargeting adverts, that these are, let's say that click was actually a meta search click, and this was a retargeting click. If you're not kind of joining up or synchronizing that spend across different partners, then there's a possibility that either you're overpaying for clicks, so your retargeting spend isn't aware of your meta search spend, and you're paying for that user multiple times. Maybe you're retargeting someone heavily on meta who's already booked through retargeting, or vice versa. So you could be wasting money there. And also, if you're on a CPA or a pay per booking basis, it can also mean that you're double paying for that same booking. So you might be paying 15% for a booking there and 20% for a booking there, and it's actually the same reservation ID. So that's something that me having previously working on the meta search squad, so we are talking, and we share all of the same data assets to make sure that we don't have that overlapping spend. And then of course, like, we will actually change our bidding differently based on someone's meta search experience, and then making sure that we kind of deduping where there's any overlapping bookings where both a meta and a retargeting bid could be attributable to a set that's driven that revenue.
So, and yeah, that's definitely one of the things I'm very excited about, right? Is in our ability to talk about both meta search and retargeting, the fact that we can syndicate and consolidate and distribute spend across those two channels and make sure that we're not, cannibalizing one or the other, or making inflating claims for one channel over the other. But it does. But where I think there are people here who are currently working with either multiple vendors on. We definitely speak to a lot of people who are using multiple vendors just on retargeting alone, but particularly using multiple vendors in the distribution space. It can be very taxing to do reconciliation between those partners on a regular basis. So getting the booking report from each, looking at the timestamps, looking at the IDs, and cross-comparing to find out what the overlap is. At least doing that on a one-off basis, just to get a sense of it. Is it 20%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? And bearing that in mind when you consider the performance claims that are going on, that's something I highly recommend. But it does, I think that would be one maybe recommended action. And I think another couple would be, well, as David says, find out what your attribution window is, and make sure you're probably keeping that consistent across different channels, or different vendors, or different channels. And then I think, and lastly, I think maybe just on this slide is, really interrogating what the different types of activity those bookings are being claimed against. Is it what proportion of click-through bookings are you getting versus view-through bookings, and starting to interrogate that, so you're not potentially you're working with a 30-day view-through, and actually the majority of the bookings that are coming through a view-through, and actually the incrementality of that may not be really there or justified.
I'd just like to clarify one point, or maybe disagreement that I have, just in terms of the attribution windows. I don't think they necessarily have to be consistent across each channel and across each partner. It's just really good to know them. So meta search, for example, exclusively, I don't think there's anyone who would work on a view-through basis. Whereas display advertising is a very different format, and so so they don't. It's not that everyone has to be all the same. But just it's really good to know where they are and to think about.
I agree, Scott. In fact, I think it would probably be impossible for lots of kind of medium, long tail size hoteliers to be able to tell different media partners what the attribution should be. There's the giant ad tech companies that just say, well, this is our way or the highway. So what is important, as Scott was alluding to, is that you're just aware of what those different attribution windows are, because then you can actually do your own data modeling yourself to figure out actually what those differences are, and make adjustments yourself.
Sure. I'm conscious we're probably running a little bit behind. We've got 15 minutes left. So I will.
So we've got a couple more sections.
So we'll go through.
Take us through this
dynamic content. So what's the point to make really here is that it's really vital that you are working with a partner, or if you're doing it yourself, that you're able to tailor the content based on what the user has actually done on your website. And so if you think about where probably one of the leading kind of industries for retargeting is within e-commerce. You add something to your basket and then you don't actually make that purchase. That it's really easy. It's very easy to understand. Right, that that dress, that pair of shoes, that whatever will follow you around the web. It's slightly different with a hotel room. You know, what is it that actually you've expressed interest in that's most going to follow you around? And so within dynamic content optimization in the kind of hospitality space, what we're doing is looking at what are the levers that the hotel has at their disposal to really show to that particular user that we think kind of on an algorithmic basis is going to be the thing that's going to tip them over the edge and cause them to come back to that website and make a booking. And so that could be things like direct booking benefits, you can see on this advert on the left. It could be just really emphasizing the price. It could be doing a comparative price if that user had made a search. It could be calling out, you know, the fact that it's a really central location. You know, you're a 2-minute walk from the Eiffel Tower. So what we're doing is we want to do, you know, loads of different experiments, basically working out for each, you know, hotel and for each kind of cohort of guests what it is that really has the highest level of click-through rate and conversion rate. You know, just as kind of to give a few examples of the kinds of things that, you know, the other ways that you can optimize for data, you know, there's the content, but there's also the way in which you show it. So animated ads, we know perform much better than static ads. So here's an example of 2 different animations that we've run. And, you know, looking at which of those perform better. Then we've done things like, you know, we ran an experiment recently where we used the price check feed that we have to dynamically insert the from price into the advert. And actually in doing that, we had a 9% jump in click-through rate. Sorry, in conversion rate. And, you know, that's quite a subtle difference. The imagery is the same, all of the colors are all the same, but they're just that price, and just that small difference actually amounted to a 9% uplift. And when you're making all these kinds of changes, they can compound to create adverts actually far more performant than others.
The nice thing here is, right, like I have an expression, right, which is that if we're going to make a decision based on opinions, we're going to use mine. But these aren't decisions based on opinions, because we have this wonderful volume of data coming through, so that we can actually, you know, rather than guessing at which one we think better, you get millions and millions of impressions across lots of different customers. And we can really make those data-driven decisions.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really interesting about that is, you know, as a team of us, every experiment we run, we will, or not all of them, but, you know, for most of the ones that we run, we'll try and take bets as a team, which is going to go. And quite often we split down the middle, and exactly. You know, one group will win one time, one will win the other time. So yeah, it's really interesting. Just looking at another kind of way in which you can animate and kind of paint a bit more of a picture of your hotel. So this is what we're calling a storyboard advert, which you might have seen on the internet. So this is where you can, through progressive disclosure, as it's called, you can show more things over time. You can highlight more of the benefits of your hotel, or more of the different sides to your hotel. So the inside, the outside, it could be the swimming pool, something like that. So that was really quickly, in a nutshell, dynamic, and just highlighting the importance there that, you know, you need to keep experimenting and trying out new things to find out what works. I think one other quick point on that that's worth saying is, you know, it's really important that your adverts aren't stale, because actually if you show the same advert to the same user, you know, 1,000 times, it's going to become less effective over time. And so you need to be careful with how long after they've left your site are you going to target them for, how many times you're going to show them the same advert. If you want to rotate those adverts, that's just something else to think about with your partner. So
right, I think we have just time now to run through Triptease's retargeting offering.
Yes.
So what are we? You know, we've been hinting at it as we've gone through this, and we've touched on this at other times and places. But what is it we're building? Why do we think it's different? Why do we think this is a really exciting and new and compelling offer for hoteliers? I'll let you go through that, Scott. You really are the expert on this.
Sure. I think we've just got a few short slides which we can use, and then take any questions
sure.
after that at the end. So I guess the first thing to point out is, as with almost all digital marketing activity, the easiest way to do better and to drive higher returns is to eliminate, you know, dumb spend, or like money that you're wasting. And so some of the examples of things where that might happen in retargeting world are someone makes a search for this weekend, and 2 weeks time you're still sending them adverts. Right. So we're using all of the data that we have from our scripts that sit on hotel websites, where we're picking up things like how many adults and children are making a search, when are they searching, what's the lead time between now and that search, are they looking at a a basic room or a more expensive room, and we're combining all of this data to make smarter decisions. And so the way in which we can kind of think about that is on a user by user basis. We can say how much we think that that individual might be worth. So just to run through these examples really quickly, the person on the left, they might have actually made a conversion in that session. There's no point, we don't want to retarget them afterwards, so that's going to be a waste of money. So let's try and save a bit of money so that we can push more into other users to drive more revenue. So then we might look at someone else, they're coming by themselves, they're only staying for one night. We might say, okay, we think the value of that booking might be $200, and then so we try to work backwards and say, okay, well, how much do we think that we should be bidding for for adverts for that user if we were to see them on a website elsewhere on the web. Whereas someone else, for example, they might be staying for 2 weeks in a high value room. It could be next week, so we think there's quite high likelihood that they're going to book this, and so we're going to adapt our bids accordingly. And so that's one of the things that's really interesting and really different about what we're doing.
So we're not setting the same bid for everybody, but kind of setting like unique bids for every single person based on our understanding of how valuable we think that person is to the telling.
Yeah, and we're
driving a load of efficiency therefore around that.
And like internally we call it like a propensity to convert index. And so every single person that leaves your site will leave with a score, and then that score will kind of change over time based on how many ads they've seen, which websites we've seen them on, if they've come back a few more times, because we know, especially for high ADR hotels, that people often come back a few times, having a few nibbles before they take the bite. And so in that instance, we'll be changing how we want to bid, and actually might get to the point where we say, okay, they're definitely going to book. We actually don't need to try to pay so much.
Right.
So the way in which we are seeing, with that small example of just by putting in price, that drove a conversion uplift. By doing things like inserting dates and from prices, it really makes the advert feel more relevant than a fairly generic advert. And so this is one of the really interesting things that we're kind of like building towards, of introducing more and more information into the ad, to the right level, right? We don't want to like overload it with 1,000 words.
So this is to drive more specific search that guy ran.
Yes. So what we're actually able to do is when someone leaves a site, we know what the last search they performed is,
right?
And then we can serve them an ad based on that. So it's almost like for them, they can click that ad, they can then return to their search.
Just jump straight back in.
Exactly. But on the other hand, we know that only about 1 in 4 homepage visitors actually even make it to the booking engine.
Yep.
So for those who leave the site, we might think, okay, what is it that we need to do to show that user, to encourage them to come back to make a search? How do we keep them moving down that purchasing funnel? That was I think that was it. Oh no, sorry, we've got a couple more. So one, just to this is kind of very similar statistic in a way to that slide from the start that said that retargeting customers is 25 times cheaper than acquiring a new customer. The stats to kind of triangulate that is 8 out of 10 website users say that they're only going to interact with an advert where they've previously kind of had some kind of engagement with that business. The other thing that Triptease are doing, which is quite unique, is really having a cohesive kind of message or creating a journey for that user that's consistent across different mediums, so on-site and off-site, so spanning from meta search through to on-site and then once they actually leave. So we can kind of hit them with consistent messaging throughout in order to drive up relevance. The final slide from me in terms of just talking about kind of the Triptease offering is, we want to be super transparent, and so this is the platform that we released a couple of weeks ago, and as kind of David alluded to earlier, this has typically been an industry that's been kind of like shrouded, and we want to do everything we can to make it super obvious for the hotels, the kind of value that they're getting out of the medium, and so we're doing more and more as we learn to kind of share that with our hotels. And so we want to give transparency around how the campaigns are performing, what the interactivity is like between views and clicks, between meta search and retargeting, and of course those two acquisition tools sit alongside, for those of you guys on the call that are existing Triptease customers with our other products, you can see those all in the same place.
Yeah, I think this is something that is close to our heart, right? Like when we were getting into this space and talking to a lot of hoteliers who were doing retargeting, like how's performance looking? Like, and they just didn't know. They're like, it's really hard for me to get that data. It's kind of locked away from me, or it's so we're like that feels like something that we care really strongly about, and putting data in the platform, making it really easy for you guys, and it's absolutely the same with retargeting. We want to do that to a really big degree.
Cool.
Okay, great.
I think we've got just a few minutes left
for questions. Looks like there's a couple of questions here. So one question is, what should I invest in first, retargeting or Meta? Scott, do you want to take that, Scott?
I think it's a good question. So I guess it depends on a few different factors. At Triptease, we talk a lot about the direct booking playbook.
That's right.
And how we believe that parity can really underpins like everything. And if you have bad pricing versus OTAs, it's going to really just hamstring all of the marketing activity you do. Because at the end of the day, price is the most important thing in the consumer's mind. And so with that in mind, I think it's kind of worth saying that if you have really bad parity, that makes meta search quite tough, right? Because you're literally advertising that you have a worse price, unless you're using someone like Triptease who's able to protect from that with parity blackout. That's just one thing to consider. I think the other thing is looking at in terms of the kind of contribution to website revenue, is in terms of to what extent does each channel move the needle. And there, I think we're still learning and finding out really what retargeting do. But I think they're probably relatively even at the moment. I think that retargeting is probably, there's slightly more work that it takes to kind of get off the ground. And I don't mean that in the terms of the times it takes to go live. I just mean you need to be thinking about your kind of creatives and improving those depending on kind of who your agency is. Whereas with meta search, it's relatively passive. You can just turn it on and leave it, assuming you have someone managing it for you.
If you looked at Triptease's own approach to the space, that might be an interesting indicator, right? Like we looked at meta search, like that is just a shopping list every single hotel on earth needs to be on today, and if they're not on there, that's crazy, right? And so that's where we felt really passionate about that and dove into meta search feet first last year. But we're only just and we've seen amazing value come from meta search, and we think similar value is going to come from retargeting, but as you say, it's definitely a more sophisticated space. And it probably does require a slightly higher barrier to entry, but we expect the impacts to be about the same. So doing either is definitely a good thing. But probably depends on your what providers are available to you, what your parity context is like, and that kind of stuff.
And like with anything, if you haven't ever done it before, try it. Shop around, speak to a few people, understand if it's something that can work for you, and give it a go and experiment.
Okay, brilliant. All right, thank you for that. I think with that we're gonna wrap up. Thank you to everyone who joining us today. We will be emailing the recording round tomorrow, so you can listen again or share it more widely. I just want to take one last moment to say thank you very much to David again for joining us. Thank you so much. You've been a massive help, and not least of which today for your insights, wisdom, and expertise. So thank you for joining us, and for getting involved. But yeah, thank you everyone, and that's it from us. And see you next time.
Thank you everyone. Bye bye.